Chapter 2. Welcome to the Menagerie. Morgan was looking around, trying to convince her brain she wasn't dreaming, when a tall man seemed to emerge from the shadows. He was wearing a dark green wool jacket and tailored slacks. The one called the curator acknowledged the man. Malcolm, meet our new keeper, Morgan Harper. The man extended his hand. Malcolm Graves. I run the facility. Morgan took it, still feeling like she was caught in some sort of fever dream. So, you manage the monster zoo? He raised an eyebrow. A bit reductive, but yes. The menagerie houses and cares for cryptids, creatures of myths, and beings that most of the world believes are legends. Some are endangered, some are dangerous, and all of them require proper care. Morgan nodded absently, trying to process the information while keeping her eyes off the thing that was still grinning at her from the ceiling. Right. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Malcolm smirked. Let me show you where you'll be working. He turned and started walking, clearly expecting her to follow. Morgan hesitated for half a second before scrambling after him, leaving the curator behind. As they moved through the facility, she stole glances at the cages and tanks lining the walls. Now that the initial shock had passed, she could take in more of the details. In one enclosure, a thick, swampy fog clung to the ground. Something massive moved within. Just a vague, lumbering shape. She could make out the silhouette of branches, no antlers, tangled with moss and dripping with water. The creature let out a low, mournful call that made the hair on her arm stand up. The plaque read, Wendigo. Further down, a tank filled with glowing blue water pulsed softly, as if the liquid itself was breathing. Inside, an elegant humanoid shape drifted weightlessly, translucent fins trailing from its arms. Its skin shimmered like an opal, and its lidless eyes flicked towards Morgan as she passed. Morgan was hit with an overwhelming sense of curiosity, not her own, but the thing swimming's. Morgan shuddered as she read, Siren. Malcolm barely glanced at them as he continued forward. Your job, simply put, is to ensure the well-being of the creatures here. Feeding, habitat maintenance, basic medical care when needed. You'll be trained on containment protocols for the more dangerous ones. Morgan frowned. Define dangerous. Malcolm paused in front of a cage covered with thick chains. For example, he gestured towards it. The cage was reinforced with iron and carved symbols. The air around it felt heavier, like stepping into a storm just before that first crack of thunder. Inside, a shadow shifted, moving unnaturally, like a flickering candle flame. Two eyes, black and endless, opened in the darkness. Morgan took an involuntary step back. What is that? She whispered. Malcolm's face remained unreadable. That, Miss Harper, is why we do not break the rules. She swallowed. Malcolm turned and continued walking, as if he hadn't just casually implied that they kept literal nightmare fuel locked up in this place. Finally, they reached a large steel door. Malcolm swiped a keycard and unlocked it with a loud clunk. Your quarters, he said, pushing it open. Morgan stepped inside. The room was nice. Not a sterile lab, but not a horror movie basement either. Just a regular, well-furnished living space. There was a plush couch, a stocked kitchenette, a desk, and a separate bedroom, and a set of neatly folded uniforms sitting on the bed. Morgan exhaled slowly. I was expecting a prison cell. We do try to make it livable, Malcolm said. Caretakers tend to stay longer when they're comfortable. The wording set off alarm bells in her head. Tend to stay longer? Morgan turned as if to ask for clarification, but Malcolm was already at the door. We will have your things brought round tomorrow. For now, you may go and grab your essentials, including your cat. Morgan turned to ask Malcolm how he knew she had a cat, but he was gone. Morgan stood there, staring at the door, then looked around the room again. What in the hell did I just sign up for? Jarvis was never going to believe any of this. Morgan had just unpacked her last box. Whoever the movers these people used were good at their jobs. Everything had been packed and labeled, and not a single item had been broken. Morgan had not had much to move from her little furnished studio apartment. Just books, clothes, and a few knickknacks and photos, but that was it. There was a sharp knock on her door. Opening it and stepping out, she saw the curator standing there with papers in hand. Just need you to sign these, and you're all set to start working. Morgan was holding her contract. Reading the fine print, it was like most job contracts, until you reached the very large section about death and dismemberment. But she signed anyway. The ink on the contract had barely dried when the curator vanished. Not metaphorically. One blink, and he was simply gone, leaving Morgan standing alone in the stone corridor with Jarvis perched tensely on her shoulder, ears twitching. An elevator dinged down the hall a second later, and a tall woman stepped out with the kind of precision that suggested she'd never been caught off guard in her entire life. Immaculate suit, impossibly smooth braids, and eyes like weathered garnet. She did not smile. "I'm Clarissa," she said. "I handle onboarding and course correction." "Course correction?" Morgan asked. "People who run screaming or get eaten." A pause. "It's rare, but not unheard of." "Great," Morgan said with an eye roll. "Follow me," Clarissa said, heels already tapping down the stone hall. They were halfway down the hall and midway through a list of rules that aren't written anywhere but will definitely get you killed when a scream echoed through the lower level. Clarissa hissed, "Already?" She turned on her heel, fast as a blade. Morgan followed instinctually. They rounded a corner, and a guard was pinned against the wall of a cell labeled D3, Quiet Room. A creature stood in front of him, tall and wrong and beautiful in the worst possible way. Her limbs were too long, her skin like cracked porcelain with gold veins glowing faintly beneath. A halo of inky black hair and white silk threads floated around her head, and in her mouth were two huge fangs dripping with venom. He looked at me. He looked at me like I was small and tame," the creature whispered, her voice full of scorn. "Please back away," Clarissa said, low and sharp. The creature didn't blink. Morgan stepped forward without thinking. "Hey," she said, "I'm sorry for what he did." The thing's head turned slowly. 8 eyes glowed like candle flames fixing on hers. "He didn't mean to insult you," Morgan said gently. "He probably didn't understand what you are." "And you do?" she asked. "No," Morgan admitted, "but I know you're not tame or small." There was a long stretch of silence, and then the creature opened its hand. The guard dropped to the ground, wheezing. Clarissa yanked him out and kept one eye on the creature. Morgan didn't flinch. She wasn't scared. She knew she should be. She wasn't. The creature moved closer to the door. "You smell like something. Something I've forgotten," she whispered. "Something old." Thanks," Morgan mumbled. The creature studied her for a moment longer. "Tell the house you belong to her. She'll listen better if you say it out loud." The creature stepped back into the room and back into its web, and the door sealed itself with a hiss. Clarissa handed Morgan a badge with her name on it. She didn't speak for a full minute, and then said, "You're very lucky." Morgan shrugged. "I guess." Clarissa glanced at her sideways. "Come on, we'll finish the orientation. You start your first shift at dawn with Malcolm."